Well, I'm thrilled to see so many people here, and I want to welcome everybody to the second to the last Lane Lyceum for the year. We are thrilled to have two amazing people who know so much about the environment and climate change. So we just have, it's going to be, I think, a wonderful evening, and I think everybody will learn a tremendous amount and very practical information. But before that, I just want to introduce, the Lane Lyceum is something that we've had going for many, many years. And it's a place that we can get together and share ideas, thinking, be challenged by ideas. And it's a wonderful tradition that I think we have at First Parish. And so we're thrilled that we have such support from so many people. And I would like to remind people, if you are new to the Lyceums and haven't gotten any notification, if you want to put your email addresses in the chat room, I will add you to our mailing list. I always send out a reminder of the upcoming events. So please feel free to do that, and I will add you to our mailing list. But I think we'll go ahead and tonight we are going to be learning about the climate crisis and how to reduce your carbon footprint within your homes. We have Ed Quinlan, who worked as a consulting engineer for 40 years, helping large buildings make their buildings more energy efficient. And what a gift that you've given over the years, Ed. And since he's retired, he's been working with Green Needham and consults with Needham homeowners. And he actually came to our house and was very helpful and was so professional in helping us just make some decisions about our own home. So that was fabulous. And we have Claire Galkowski, who is the executive director of the South Shore Recycling Cooperative. She helps 18 towns reduce their waste and advocates for better waste policies. She's also a member of First Parish and Needham's Green Congregation, and supported all of their work that they've been very active. So we are fortunate to have these two wonderful speakers. Jan Galkowski may have say hello a few times. He's a resident expert as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ed Quinlan and welcome to everybody. I also ask everybody to mute. It just helps the sound, it's very helpful. Okay, take it away. Okay, all set, Ed.
Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yep, looks good.
Oh, they're all muted. Sorry about that. The other thing we talked about before the beginning of the Lyceum is we would hope if you could hold your questions to the end. There's a lot of material to get through. What we'd suggest is you put your questions in the chat box, and when we're finishing up, we'll try to go through items that still haven't been answered by the various content that we're going through tonight. So with that, I will get started here. People think of the climate crisis as something new. Going back to the 1980s, I remember this testimony to Congress by James Hansen back in 1988, where he pointed out a really serious issue. At the time, it was couched to some degree as theoretical. The science was clearly in a very immature state at that point, but there was enough information at that time to realize this is something we cannot ignore. And CO2 rising in our atmosphere, mostly from fossil fuel combustion, we're headed to warming our atmosphere by 2 to 3 degrees centigrade. It was Hansen's original. Just to put that in context, the last time the Earth was that warm was 3 million years ago, when the oceans were between. So if that were to come to pass, I don't need to tell you what kind of a world. The atmosphere, we often think of it as this infinite thing, because you look up into the sky, to the blue sky, and it looks like it just goes on forever and ever. But the reality is 99% of our atmosphere is within 20 miles of the surface. And just to put this into a kind of a context that you can wrap your head around, if the Earth was the size of a basketball, the atmosphere would be the. So what we are fouling, what we are messing with, is a very delicate structure that envelops our Earth and literally makes life possible. And it's something that we need to be more cognizant of our effects upon. Real quickly, probably all know this, the atmosphere is transparent to solar radiation. It's like a piece of glass, sunlight comes right through. But the heat, after it strikes the Earth, heats up the land, heats up the water. That infrared radiation, some people often say it's reflected back to the Earth. It's not reflected. The atmosphere relative to infrared radiation is kind of like a fog or a haze. It absorbs that infrared radiation and re-emits it. The thicker that fog, the less radiation lost to space. And that's what the that's accumulating in our atmosphere is doing. It's making that fog thicker and thicker, which is changing that heat balance between Earth and space. I am constantly just trying to wrap my head around what we're talking about relative to the amounts of fossil fuel that we're consuming. It is really beyond human comprehension. Natural gas, 383 billion cubic feet per day. Coal, 48 billion pounds per day. Oil consumption, 100 million barrels per day. How do you get your arms around that enormity? So one little thought experiment: if you converted all that natural gas, all that coal, into oil equivalent, put it all in oil barrels, you could line those oil barrels up end to end to end, and they would circle the Earth 2 times. That's 1 day's worth of energy consumption on this planet. If you stacked those barrels of oil one on top of the other. So we're talking about a industrial process that dwarfs really anything, I think, in human history. It is just beyond human comprehension. And when you think about all that fuel being burned, sure we're talking about, the problem kind of becomes a little more apparent. Now, the other thing people don't often realize is that all this fossil fuel, it's actually fossil solar energy. Millions and millions of years ago, in the oceans of the Earth, all that phytoplankton, blue-green algae fixed the sunlight with carbon dioxide, basically extracted carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. In essence, was the first natural carbon capture and sequester system. Nature's been doing this for many, many millions of years, and all that carbon dioxide was sequestered into sediments under the oceans, which we are now grabbing all those hydrocarbons, whether it be natural gas, oil, coal, oxidizing it, which is the name for burning, and releasing that CO2 back to the atmosphere. So we are under an incredible geoengineering experience. Fate, whose ultimate destiny is in our hands, and we've got to deal with it very soon. Oh, this one here. This is a graph that I saw in MIT Tech Review back in 2006. And, it struck me at the time. I stared at this thing forever. I finally realized it really shows very, very clearly the correlation between the levels of CO2, the average global temperature, and the levels of the ocean, sea level, over the past 500,000 years. It ends to the right at the present. But what it doesn't show between 2006 and today, between basically what they call present and when the article was published, we had gone all the way from somewhere around 290 up to 377 parts per million. I wrote in the next line above it. That squiggly line that I wrote in with 420. So we've gone from 377 up to 420 as of today, 420 parts per million compared to historically somewhere between 200 and 300 parts per million. Now, one day when I had this posted on my wall, on my dorm, one of my engineers came up to me and said, well, hell, we're all the way up at 377. Why aren't we on fire? And what Jen didn't kind of think about is the Earth has embedded in the called thermal inertia. It takes time for that carbon dioxide effect to actually manifest itself. What we're seeing now is just that. This is now from the 1880s, basically at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Carbon dioxide slowly rising and getting much more rapid after World War II, and the temperature curve following it very carefully. So there really is, the science is pretty well established. I mean, you're still going to get folks who think the Earth is flat and that man hasn't landed on the moon. But I'm sorry, by far the predominant explanation by the scientific community is that this is real, and it's something, the longer we wait, the more pain we're going to have trying to turn it around. Historically, the carbon emissions literally from prior to the Industrial Revolution, 1850, I mean, this is basically when we started burning coal. And as you can see, the graph kind of meanders up right around here. Now we're into World War II. After World War II, things really took off and climbing ever since. This line that says projected as flat, that's a fantasy. That's for quite a while. So where's all this carbon coming from? Where's all this carbon dioxide emissions coming from? China looks like the bad guy. Their emissions are by far the greatest. US second, India, the European community. But this is recent greenhouse gas emissions. China is high because they are the factory to the world. They're producing all the goods that we consume and for the most part throw away. So you'd expect those carbon emissions today on their part to be high. But let's look at what's happened historically. Historically, United States is way out front, hugely beyond anybody else. China's second, Russia and Germany. Literally 4 countries in the world responsible for 50% of all the historic emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So when the small Pacific Island nations say, hey, we didn't cause this problem, who's going to pay for it? It can't be us. We don't have any money. Clearly, they're looking at the people who caused the problem. Now, on our side of the fence, you've got Congress who obviously sees things differently. So how this all gets cleaned up, who pays for it, that's a question that's yet to be really answered. So let's look at, in the United States, let's look at where this is all coming from. As far as greenhouse gas effects, carbon dioxide is by far the lion's share. It's the pie chart to the left. You're seeing carbon dioxide is about 77% of the global warming effect, followed by methane at about 11%, nitrous oxide 7%, and then you've got these hydrofluorocarbons and other trace gases that are also responsible. Methane, it's funny, part of it is leakage in our gas distribution infrastructure, but a lot of it's cow farts and cow belches and just associated with agricultural production in general. Nitrous oxide, a lot of it's also agricultural production, industrial activity, and combustion fuels. So that's where all the carbon, or that's where all the greenhouse gas emissions break down as far as what's most important. Now let's look over to the right at what sectors of our economy are really contributing to all of these greenhouse gas emissions. We're this residential pie, which I'm going to kind of talk about tonight, how we can do something about that. That looks really small. It's only 6.7% if my glasses are properly adjusted here. One of the smallest of reality is in the next picture. The reality is something like 57% of this transportation sector pie is literally for automobiles, not trucks, automobiles. These are the cars that we drive. So I'm saying that part of the pie is in our residential category. Also, electric power, which overall 25%, 43% of electric power is consumed in households. So then what's in this residential sector by itself? That's just the fuel oil and the natural gas that we burn to heat our homes. But these huge numbers here, transportation, electric power, you combine that with what we're doing for heat, literally one third of all the domestic carbon emissions are associated with our households, whether it be our house, literally, our heating system, or our cars, it's our households. Real quickly on what's been happening in the electrical generation sector, because I'm going to talk about how the electrical generation sector is hopefully going to be part of our answer. You can see historically, coal is the dark brown bar. So back 30 years ago, coal was the predominant fuel source. Coal is the dirtiest source of energy in power plants that we can burn. Back then, the yellow, which is natural gas, was a very small portion. And so what's happened over the last 30 years? Basically, natural gas at the bottom has essentially displaced coal, with a little bit of increasing contributions from renewable, although I must admit that most of this renewable number, except for maybe the last few years, most of that was mostly hydropower. We all think of it as wind power and solar, and that's only really becoming predominant in the later years. Nuclear, the purple up top, that's been steady at around 20% of our power production over the past, actually for a long time, 40, 50 years. And you know, the electric grid in the United States, it's a hodgepodge of districts, some with interconnections, some with not. The colors tell you how clean those electric generating areas of our country are. So you get out to the Midwest, you know, the mountain area where it's coal country. That's why it's very dark brown. They're burning mostly coal. You get to the East Coast, it's a lot of natural gas, hydro, and nuclear. Interestingly, you cross the border into Canada, it's green. They literally, their carbon emissions are essentially zero. You live in Canada, you have a heat pump, you have an electric car, you don't have any carbon emissions associated with your house to speak of. All right, now let's get into the real discussion. I wanted to give you a little background, but now let's talk about what we can do in our house, because as I said, our homes, our households, 33% of the problem is there. Step number one, before you talk about solar, before you talk about heat pumps, get yourself, sign up for a mass save audit. It's free. The recommendations they make for how you can button up your home more tightly, it's primarily going to be all about adding insulation where you can and doing tightening up your envelope through the use of caulking holes, sealant, things like that. They'll provide a report with their findings. They'll provide you with an estimated cost to make the improvements. Now, Mass Save, the audit is free. They pay 100% of the, what I'll call the sealing work, finding all those cracks and holes and sealing them up. And they'll pay 75% of any added insulation work in the house. And if you go after further down the talk tonight, we're going to talk about things you can do relative to heat pumps. You go after some of the more cost advantaged heat pump options. They're going to first require you not only to do the audit, but you've got to implement the main measures that they recommend. Now, I'm saying it's free, and I'm saying it's mostly paid for by the state, but that's not really true. It's paid for by you. If you look on your utility bill, you look at all the little notes and stuff, you'll see a charge for energy conservation. You're paying for this, so take advantage of it. So the weatherization. Think of your house as an envelope. I'm talking about the spaces that surround your living spaces, the attic not being part of your envelope. That's basically the outdoors. So what they're looking for are leaks in the envelope. They're looking for leaks at the sill plate, air getting into the house, attic hatches that aren't sealed at all, recessed lights in your upper floor level, which is penetrating your building envelope, sealing those penetrations, basically getting the air leakage rate in the house down. Think of a house, believe it or not, think of a house as a hot air balloon. In the winter, it's like a mini hot air balloon. And that air wants to, it's called exfiltrate. It wants to leave the house via the upper levels, and the air taking its place is entering the house at the lower levels. So you want to cut off the pathways both at the bottom and the top, and in the middle with windows, when you get those wind bursts, which is the other form that drives infiltration. Often it's leaky windows and doors and open. So this is what Mass Save is really focusing on in their initial visit. They'll also talk to you about your heating systems, the opportunities for doing heat pumps, but their main gig is weatherizing the house. In older houses, and when I say older, I'm talking houses that probably predate 1950. In many of those houses, there's either little or no insulation in the exterior walls. The only way you can really determine that is making some probes, some openings in the walls. The way what I do, I take that nice painting you have off your exterior wall, I take it down, drill a little hole. Do I see any fiberglass, any insulation? That answers the question. You do that in a few spots. Seal up the hole with a little caulk and put the painting back in its place. You'll never know that anybody was there. Now, where you have situations where you don't have insulation, typically the way to do it is to remove the exterior clapboards. They don't have to remove all the clapboards, just maybe every 5 or 6 vertical feet, they'll pull a clapboard board, drill a hole, pump in the insulation, because they got to drill a hole every 16 inches because your studs are on every 16 inches. Fill the cavity, plug the hole, move on to the next bay. And at the end, they put the clapboard back up and you're in business. Up in the attic, they'll typically blow in loose fill insulation. It can be either fiberglass or cellulose fiber. And again, this is done typically 75% of the cost paid by Mass Save. If you were low income, it's 100% of the cost paid by Mass. Okay, so now you've got a house that's been weatherized. You've tightened up the envelope. You've done what you can to reduce your infiltration losses and made the insulation situation a lot better. So now step number 2 is, okay, now it's the time to talk about your heating and cooling systems and what you can do with it. So this beast here on the left, it was someone, they might be on tonight's show. I don't know. We know them. They're church folks. But anyway, they still have a steam boiler that was originally coal-fired, converted to oil, then converted to gas. This thing is over 100 years old. So it defies what I'm going to tell you, which is that your heating and cooling systems typically have a life expectancy of 15 to 25 years. Furnaces less, 15 on the time scale. Boilers more like 20 to 25. The problem is, and I've dealt with a few folks who have experienced this. They don't even think you tip, and it's as common. I understand how this happens. You don't even think about replacing anything until it breaks. The problem is when it breaks, especially if it's heating in the middle of the winter, you're going to scramble and your contractor is going to just get the stuff that he can get his hands on quickest to get you back in operation. Well, guess what? That's not going to be the system that you really want to put in if you're interested in trying to make this house a carbon-free or less carbon heavy environment. You want to plan. And the way to plan is ask yourself, what's the age of the equipment? If you're in the 15 to 20 year span of time, I'm telling you, you're due. It's going to die, or it's going to start requiring relatively frequent maintenance calls, which cost money and usually result in lower efficiency. So plan ahead. Don't wait for stuff to fail. And in the form of hot water heaters, by the way, if they're gas-fired self-contained heaters, if you get 10 years out of those, you're lucky, because they're gonna break and cause a mess in your basement. The reason we're telling people convert to heat pumps, it's all about getting rid of that source of fossil fuel for your heating and hot water. Gas will always have the carbon footprint it has. Oil, same thing. By converting to heat pumps, you're switching over to electricity as your source, and as the grid gets cleaner, your carbon emissions associated with that operation get lower and lower. So, what is a heat pump? Everyone on this call, without exceptions, has a heat pump. It's called a refrigerator. Let me take this refrigerator example just for a second. We'll start inside the refrigerator, the thing that's labeled as item 4. That's the cooling coil. If it's your refrigerator, that coil's probably running at about 20 degrees. So it's extracting heat from that 40-degree compartment. It's being absorbed by the refrigerant. The refrigerant is flowing down to the box labeled 1. That's the compressor. The compressor does exactly what it's called. It compresses the gas, which raises its temperature. And if you remember your 7th grade science, when you compress a gas, you raise its temperature. So now that cold refrigerant that absorbed heat from that box is now elevated to a higher temperature. And now that heat that was absorbed from the box can be discharged to the surrounding space, in this case, your kitchen. And then the process continues. It goes through an expansion valve, number 3, which again allows for the significant reduction in the pressure of the gas, and the cycle continues. So a heat pump for your home is really, think of this box, think of the refrigerator. Inside the refrigerator as the outside air. The outside air is 30 degrees. The refrigerant inside the heat pump coil is 10 degrees. A fan is blowing that 35-degree air over that 10-degree coil. It's absorbing heat from that cold coil. Sorry, it's transferring heat from the outside to that cold coil. The refrigerant passes on to the compressor, raises its temperature. That now hot gas is liberated as heat to your space, to heat your house. Goes back through the expansion valve, low pressure state, absorbs more heat, and the process continues. The one thing that's different about a real heat pump is that they are two-way devices. So in the winter, they operate to absorb heat from the cold outside air and transfer that to the indoors. In the summer, they absorb heat from the cool inside house and reject it to the hot outdoor environment. And then one more piece of information, because this is going to come up for discussion later on. COP, coefficient of performance. Some people call this the efficiency. And all it means is for every kilowatt hour of electricity that you put into that compressor, you get 2 to 4 kilowatt hours of heat transferred. So it's like it's a 300% efficient machine. The distinction here, and this is really important, people say, how could that be? That's breaking the law of thermodynamics. The heat pump is not creating heat, it's moving heat. It's just moving heat through this circuit. It's not like a resistance heater where you put a kilowatt hour of electricity in and you get a kilowatt hour of heat out. It's a heat pump, not a heat maker. Moving along. Heating source comparisons. Why, how do all these different fuels compare to one another? I've got oil in my house, and hopefully soon to be a heat pump. For every million BTUs of oil, and for oil, a million BTUs is about 7 gallons. For every million BTUs of oil that I burn, I emit 204 pounds of carbon. You have natural gas. For every million BTUs of natural gas you burn, you're emitting about 130 pounds of carbon. That were a heat pump operating with a COP of 2.5. In other words, an efficiency of 2.5 times. Your carbon emissions would be down around 74 pounds of carbon per million BTU. Now, if you lived in Utah, where they burn coal, those carbon emissions associated with the air source heat pump would be a lot higher because the grid out there is a lot dirtier. So this graph is going to change by virtue of where you're located and what your electric utility company is using for a mix of fuels. But here in New England ISO, which is the grid operator, they issue this data. These are the carbon emission relative to various fuels. The thing with gas, propane, oil, those numbers are never going to change. Oil is always going to have these emission values. That's it. That's the nature of the beast. Whereas over here with your air source heat pump, what is today 73.9 pounds of carbon per million, over time as the grid gets cleaner, that number is going to go down, 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 down. If you have solar on your house, and here's the hard one, you have enough solar panel to actually operate your heat pump, then your carbon emissions are zero. Or when we finally get community electric aggregation, which I'll talk about in a second, and you buy the full green power option and you have heat pumps, your carbon emissions are zero. So the whole idea of switching from fossil fuel heating to a heat pump is to allow you to get rid of your carbon emissions associated with your heating system. Over here on the far right, geothermal, which everybody has heard about. It is more efficient than air source heat pumps. It's not dramatically more efficient. It is quite a bit more costly, although there are enhanced incentives from the feds. So the cost hurt is not as bad as it would be without those incentives. Okay, how would it happen? How would this conversion take place in a house? First of all, I've probably been into 60 or 70 houses looking at people's systems, and probably without exaggeration, there's probably been 20 or 30 unique combinations of systems. There is no one solution for everybody's different house. And that's why you really, one solution does not fit all. You need it done for your specifics. But let's just look at a kind of a typical house. You have a gas furnace. It might be in your basement. This one happens to be up in the attic. You also have an air conditioning system that is part of that heating system. And you've got a ductwork system that takes that hot air, cooled air, distributes it through ductwork and supplies it to the spaces to heat and cool the spaces. Heat pump system would really look identical. You're still going to have an outdoor unit. It won't be called an air conditioner unit. It'll be called a heat pump unit. You're still going to have an indoor blower unit. I'm going to call it a blower unit. It's really a fan, a filter, and a cooling coil. No more furnace. The furnace goes away. There are options for keeping the furnace as a supplement or a backup, but in the pure heat pump solution, you wouldn't have a furnace anymore. But picture-wise, it's really kind of an identical situation. Here's a picture of a typical, all these things out here. This must be a condo building with a bunch of units. You have a whole bunch of air conditioning units outside. Somebody chose to install an air source heat pump. in front of all these other units. Now, the reality is, yeah, this is an air source heat pump and it's a pretty common looking one. But when you buy a heat pump that's sourced from Japan, Korea, China, they do typically take that shape form. The ones developed or manufactured by GE, the domestic manufacturers, you'll see it and they're going to look just like what you normally see as an air conditioner. The shape doesn't matter. It just happens to be the style for whatever reason the manufacturers chose to use that form factor for their box. One thing different about an air conditioner versus a heat pump here in New England, the heat pump has to be up on a stand because it has to get up above the snow line. Air conditioners, you don't care about it. You're not running it in the winter. Heat pump, you're relying on it for your heat. You got to get it up off the ground. Now, if you don't have a house with a duct system, let's say it's just a house with heating, and you want to do a heat pump and get the benefit of air conditioning. But remember, when you do a heat pump system, you're not just getting a heating system. By definition, you are getting a heating and cooling system, whether it's a ducted system or whether it's a ductless system like what I'm showing here. So in this situation, you end up with one outdoor unit, kind of like the last picture, and there'll be refrigerant piping, very small copper refrigerant piping that connects each of the 4 indoor wall-mounted cassettes to the outdoor unit. Each cassette has its own handheld temperature controller. So the other advantage is now with the ductless units, you're getting room by room temperature control. So you can really dial it into exactly what you want. I've heard from many people they don't like the ductless systems. They don't want to add hardware to their walls. I get it. You know, I get it. It's just that if you don't have a ducted system now to begin with, to do a ducted heat pump system is going to be more money than doing a ductless heat pump system. If you have a ducted air conditioning system, it's going to be cheaper than the ductless. So if you've got duct work, you're on the cheaper end of the spectrum of converting to heat pumps. Now, here's your traditional wall-mounted unit. Everybody's seen these in people's places. They also make units that can go in the ceiling if you prefer. I have a floor-mounted unit up here in my house, up in my vacation house up in New Hampshire. So you've got varieties. It's not all on the wall, but you've got to have something in each room if you don't have ductwork distributing the air. I'm gonna pass by this. This talks about different options for different types of systems. We're probably not going to have time to go through all of this. That's where I'll tell you at the end how to hook up with help figure this out. I also just want to mention geothermal. So instead of using the air as your source of heat, the outside air, that's why it's called air source heat pump. Geothermal, it's called ground source heat pump. That's your source of heat. It's coming from the ground. Now you're not extracting water. You're literally they can be deep boreholes, 350, 400 feet deep, or they can be shallow, coiled loops underground. Although this picture is not accurate. You got to be 6, 7, 8 feet down, and it takes a lot more area than you're seeing here. The only time you'd even think about this is if you have like an acre of land that you can rip up during initial construction. The picture of a geothermal system going in Needham a few months back. It is a machine intensive project. These are the supply and return pipes. So they drill a 400-foot borehole. They drop these pipes down into the borehole. They pump the borehole full of, it's like a grout. It's like a slurry that hardens. And the fluid circulates down into the hole and back up through the pipe. It never comes into contact with the soil. And then here are the pipes being routed back to the house. Here's the old air conditioner that's still sitting there. And then when you get into the house, here's the geothermal heat pump system. Looks like a furnace you might have in your house connected to the supply and return ductwork in the house. So it can be incorporated into a house that has ducted systems. But I tell you, you look at this, you're going to do some serious landscaping when they get out of there. Hot water. How do you get your hot water? There are heat pump water heaters. So they're using electricity, but not electric resistance. They're operating at 2 to 3 times more efficient than your standard electric water heater. They're extracting heat from your basement. Now in the summer, late spring, summer, and early fall, that's a blessing because it's a built-in dehumidifier for your basement. In the winter, it's extracting heat from the basement, which has to get made up by the heating system. But this is how you do your hot water with your heat pump system. Got to make sure you got the electrical supply. You're going to need at least 200 amp service. Most people do, but check the main breaker. It'll usually have a number stamped onto it. It should say 200. If it does, you should be good. Make sure your appliances, now we're getting into the appliance side of things. Energy Star, buy Energy Star. First of all, you'll typically get rebates and you're going to save money in the long frame. Induction cooking, get rid of that gas stove. We had gas, it was propane, but it was gas and we loved it. We went to electric induction and it's much better. It's faster. Believe it or not, control is tighter. I wouldn't go back to gas in a heartbeat. I'd never go back. You also, I mean, some people talk about the health emissions associated with gas combustion. I don't really know the full science of that, but it's something to be considered. One downside, although I'm glad for me, we had to replace all of our cookware because we had aluminum mostly. You have to have either stainless steel or cast iron for the induction electromagnetic coupling between the element. Ease. You're going to see in a minute how cars are huge carbon eaters, carbon emitters for our lifestyle. Don't despair. Variety of cars are going to increase. Costs are going to come down. Maintenance. People don't talk about maintenance very much. There's practically nothing to maintain on these cars, and the drivetrain, which includes the batteries, are warranted for 100,000 miles. I didn't realize that was a federal government regulation. 8 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. If you own 2 cars, there's no reason why one of them can't be a full EV. And if you're still not confident, and I totally get it, then fine, get the second car as a plug-in EV. We did that with our second car. It's a Toyota, what do you call it? A Toyota RAV4. We get 40 to 50 miles on electric. And if we're off on a trip, it just converts, switches automatically to gas for the rest of the trip until you get back to a charging state. Here's the carbon emissions on cars. So your typical sedan, this whole graph is based on 10,000 miles driven per year for the car. Sedan, the green bars are carbon emissions, 6,000 pounds of carbon emitted in a year driving 10,000 miles. The same Tesla, driven the same 10,000 miles, 1,600 pounds of carbon, almost only 25% of the emissions. It's more dramatic than a heat pump for your house. It's huge. The Toyota RAV4, a little bit higher emissions, but they would be compared to an SUV, which is way up here. So the internal combustion engine, which has been around for 100 years, I mean, look at this. Only 20 to 30% of the fuel is actually being transformed into mechanical work. In an EV, going all the way from charging the battery and then turning that battery into electric power to drive the motor, you're getting 70 to 80% of throughput of energy. That's partly why the cars are so much more efficient. And dollar-wise, even at $3.50 a gallon and our very high electric rates, the Tesla is costing about $1,000 per year for the electricity. The sedan is costing about $1,000. They're basically a wash right now. If you were living in an area like my sister where the cost of electricity was half of what we pay, she's down in Maryland, the Tesla would be down around $500 for electricity. I'm thinking I just have to blow through this. Maybe I'll talk real quickly. I did some graphs. An existing older house, kind of minimal insulation, leakage pretty high, gas appliances. versus doing this first yellow group here. That's Mass Save coming in and tightening up the envelope, adding insulation. And then this is going all electric with heat pumps and EVs and all the rest. I use some software to run the numbers. So this is the existing house, in this case with oil. Before you do anything, it's your, your 1960s no Mass Save thing. See this stuff up here? That's all your electric. When people who put solar in their house, all they were doing as far as carbon emissions go, they were just knocking off this. This is heat. This is hot water. This is your car. These are the carbon emissions that you haven't even touched. Now, this is the same house, but with gas, car, heat, less carbon emissions because it's a little bit cleaner fuel. And there's your carbon emissions for their hot water. This is where the bar graph drops further because now Mass Save has tightened your envelope. So this bar, you see the change from no real good insulation to pretty good insulation. Heat drops. And then this is the final drop after you electrify everything, having gone through the Mass Save audit. Important thing, again, I want to point out, all you could do to try to attack your carbon footprint back here was to put solar on your house to address your electrical consumption. Now you're fully electrified. Now you can attack the whole house, including the car. These are costs. We don't have time to dwell on this too deeply. One analysis I did for a fellow in Needham, he had a 20-year-old system. One of the AC units has already died. I just went through the analysis with him. This was the final page showing him, here's your existing utility costs. This is what's going to happen after you go to heat pumps. He actually has a little bit of savings because he had oil. Oil's more expensive. So those are his annual heating bill savings. This is the construction cost for his 2-system heat pump system. These are the incentives from the state and the feds. So you take that number off of that to come up with a net construction cost. And here's the key. Traditional HVAC system upgrade. All of his systems were well past 20 years. He was looking at replacement of all this stuff. Well, take the $30,000 you're going to spend to just replace like for like and apply it to the $31,700 net cost of going to a heat pump system to come up with a new net cost for heat pumps of practically nothing. Look what happened to his carbon emissions, going down from 23,000 down to 9,800. It had a huge bite out of his carbon. He already had solar, but the solar was only for his electric utilities, and he couldn't add more for the heat pumps. Not going to go through this other than to say these are all the rebates, tax credits available. At the bottom, all these things that you're doing through Mass Save, they offer 0% interest up to 7-year term, up to $25,000 loan, $50,000 if it's a heat pump. So you can use their money. I mean, why not use their money and keep your money, hopefully in some kind of an interest-bearing account, and just pay it off over 7 years at 0 interest. It's part of what Mass Save is offering to help people make these changes. Real quickly, Claire is going to go into it. PV, solar panels converting sunlight to DC. The inverter converts it to AC, plugged into your main breaker panel. You either use that juice if you have load during the day, or the power is exported to the grid as excess power. At night, the power comes from the grid through the meter to the house. That's why they call this a net meter. It's measuring the power going in, the power going out, and at the end of the month, you pay the bill, the net meter bill. I'm gonna, you know what, I'll go by this too. I'll let Claire talk maybe about some of her financial numbers. I'll just say this, right now, I've done about 30 or 40 solar things with folks, advising them what to do. And I've been reviewing the proposals they've been getting. Solar numbers are coming in between $3.75 and $4 a watt. The watt, that's the panel capacity. So if you need a 7 kW system times $4, it's $28,000 system. For most of our homes, you're going to be somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 upfront cost 1/3 of that paid for by your federal tax credit. Paybacks with current utility rates in this region are running about 7 years, which means it takes about 7 years to recoup your investment in the form of saved electric savings. Community electric aggregation. Here's the other way. If you can't do solar, this is a way to basically get green electricity. Your electric bill, it includes something called the generation charge. Eversource doesn't generate electricity. They sold off by mandate. They sold off all the power plants 25 years ago. They go into the marketplace and they buy power just like you can, and then they distribute it to your house. This is what they're paying the independent power producers. This is what they're charging you for maintaining the grid. And the total of those two numbers is about 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, this number here, compare it to what Cambridge did a community electric aggregation, I don't know, a few years back. What we're paying is 25 cents. Cambridge is 10 cents. And if you go full solar, it's only 13 cents. So community electric aggregation allows a town to go out to the marketplace in the name of their residents and negotiate for 1, 2, 3, 4-year contracts for power at fixed rates that are then offered to the residents in the town to either take it or stick with Eversource. If Needham, once it finally does it, which is still a few years out, if Needham gets a rate that's better than Eversource's rate, you take it. If for some reason the next year, the rate we locked into, Eversource can do better, fine. You drop the CEA rate and you switch back to Eversource. There's absolutely no risk on the homeowner's part, and you have the option of paying a little bit more and actually getting green power. So if you can't do solar, here's the way you can really get it and be confident about it. Excuse me. We're almost done here. We don't think about how we get around besides our cars. Transportation, air transportation, it's really carbon intensive. What I was struck to find is that, yeah, when you fly from Boston to New York on these short haul flights, really short haul flights, air travel is really carbon intensive. But look here, and this was a British production. With one person driving a car, you're actually rivaling the carbon emissions from I'm talking now fuel carbon emissions from a plane. A car doesn't get to be respectable from carbon emissions versus these other things until you get 2 or more people. These what are called, Boston to San Francisco or Boston to France are what they're calling short and long haul economy. The problem with air travel is not that the technology is like super crazy carbon intensive. It's that it's allowing you to fly 10,000 miles. Can you imagine driving? I mean, if you drove as a single person 10,000 miles, you'd actually emit more carbon than that airline flight. So it isn't the technology, it's how it's opened the world up to us to travel literally around the world. Final, food. Food, I was blown away. You'll see in the next graph. Food is a huge carbon intensive process. And I think, as most people probably know, it has a lot to do with the way we grow our food in this country, the industrial manufacturing, industrialization of our dairy and livestock process, which is also kind of disgusting. But you can see from these bar graphs a kind of a meat lover diet, an average diet, a no beef diet, vegetarian, vegan. Obviously, eating lower on the food chain is a much better place to be. And the other thing of note that I found interesting, this is from the USDA, by the way. They're basically saying that approximately 1/3 of our agricultural production never reaches our table, or reaches our table and ends up in the garbage. So we only use about 2/3 of what is actually produced. So now let's go back to those graphs we had before. We've got on this side with your old funky house, we've got heat and hot water up here in blue. We've got our electric in orange. We've got our gas car in gray. We've got our single trip. This was a family of 4, Boston, San Francisco, round trip. There's the carbon for that flight, family of 4. And here's your food, 5,000 pounds of carbon per person per year. Family of 4, 20,000 pounds. And in our spectacular house with heat pump, here's your heat, here's your electric, there's your cars. All of a sudden, those air flights and your food look ominously large. I don't know what we're going to do about our food. We can certainly cut down some, but we have to eat. But anyway, it kind of puts it in perspective. So in summary, please get a free mass save audit. Make the improvements that they're recommending. Don't wait for your systems to fail. I'm going to say it again. Don't wait for your systems to fail. Plan on replacement when they're approaching the end of the useful life. Replace your gas appliances with electric. Always look for the Energy Star label. Next car should be EV or a plug-in EV. Solar on your house if you can do it. Community electric aggregation when it becomes available. Eat lower on the food chain and buy local. Better for you and better for the planet. Cut down on food waste and compost your waste. Use the most efficient means of traveling when taking long trips. And vote, 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 vote. That's probably the most important thing I can tell you. Green Needham, how can we help you? If you go to our page, there's a button somewhere. It says Ask the Expert. If you click on that and enter your data, it'll probably come to me. I'm the one who's doing most of this right now. I'll contact you, get some information from you, come and visit you, look at your house, look at your utility bills, figure out what's best for your particular situation, give you an estimate of what your construction costs would be, what your bills will look like, and what your carbon emissions will end up being. But most importantly, this is what I've found people have found to be the most helpful thing. They are intimidated by the process. And by that, I mean, it's confusing. It's technology that they don't really understand. It's a lot of money. They're talking to contractors who, let's face it, a contractor wants to do what they're used to doing. So they're going to want to sell you the piece of equipment or the type of system that they're used to selling. So having someone sitting on their side of the table, not literally with the contractor, but in the background, advising you, looking at proposals, giving you recommendations, that's what people have found to be the most helpful. And that's what we can do for you at no cost to you. So we've spent the better part of an hour talking about how we can use, ironically, how we can use technology to help save us from the technology that's threatening our very existence. But, technology by itself is not enough. We have to alter our relationship to the natural world. Nature is not something to be subdued. It's not a commodity to be exploited. We need to treat the natural world with respect and honor it. Without this shift in our perspective, I don't think, all the technology in the world can't save us. Part of the problem is in our head. Years ago, when I was in college studying environmental science, I came across a quote from a Native American that captured the essence of the difference between his people world versus the white man's. I found it, I scribbled it down on a piece of paper, and I've held that piece of paper since then. Here's the quote, Luther Standing Bear. Earth was bountiful, and we were surrounded with the blessings of the great mystery. We did not think of the great open plains, the beautiful rolling hills, the winding streams with tangled growth as wild. Only to the white man was nature a wilderness, and only to him was the land infested with wild animals and savage people. To us, it was tame. So we got to get that kind of mentality, consciousness, if we're going to be serious about turning things around. So that's the end of my piece. I'm gonna, if I can remember how to doing this. Stop share. Thank you, Leslie. Leslie's been here as my co-pilot. Thank you, Leslie. Now I can stop share and hand it over to Claire.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was, I couldn't have said it better myself. Everything you said was just perfect. And so that's going to probably make my presentation, well, my presentation pretty much echoes yours, but it's just going to address our particular house here. So let me start sharing my screen. And I've got to stop share because I did the wrong thing. Share, I gotta pick the right one, PowerPoint. Okay, share. Now I gotta go to the slideshow. Come on. Oh, this bar is in my way, I'm sorry. Slideshow. Hello. From the current slide. There we go. So Jan and I have done pretty much everything that Ed has said. But I want to emphasize that we started 12, 13 years ago. And it was a kind of meandering path. It wasn't like we sat down and decided we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. It just kind of happened. So what I'd like to emphasize that, you know, the last slide, and we'll repeat it then, says a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. When I bought the house back in 2009, one of the first things I did was a mass save energy audit. How do I move this? Shoot. Trying to figure out how to advance my slide here. All right, enter. Why isn't it working?
You have a mouse?
Yeah.
I was using my mouse to roll the slides.
I'm trying to, yeah, I'm trying that too.
Claire, if you got it?
No, but
if you can't, I have the slides if you have a problem with that.
you know what I think would be easiest is just everybody move your people faces over to where my slides are going down. I don't want to waste any more time fooling around with this. So the house is as old as I am. I'm giving away my secrets here. It's a mid-century multi-level. It's got 4 levels. Just a typical split level, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. The realtors will tell you it's got 1,500 square feet of space, but if you count the finished-ish basement, it's about 1,900. When I bought it, it had an oil furnace with baseboard heat. It had tankless hot water, which was affiliated with the furnace. The electric dryer, the electric stove, because we don't have gas on our street. And so the first thing I did when I bought it was to call Mass Save and have them check out how well sealed up it was. Because before you do anything else, as Ed said, you gotta close things up. Do the easy stuff first. We've had Mass Save in actually 3 or 4 times since we bought the house. So I recommend if you haven't had a Mass Save audit in 4 or 5 years, give them a call and have them come back and see what else they can do for you. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something. The next year, let's see, I can't remember if you were here yet, but we replaced the windows, which were old single pane, double hung windows on the ropes and everything, you know, the old fashioned windows. So we just did Anderson double pane replacements, which are pretty good. I'm sure there are better windows out there, but it definitely made a big difference. And there were some rebates associated with that as well. A few years later, in 2014, I got tired of cursing my kitchen. And this is the old kitchen. Everything was jammed up in one corner. Where's the bench? What are you talking about?
The patch, it's hiding part of the picture.
Yeah. Well, this is the kitchen. No, I don't have a picture of the whole kitchen.
I see.
So this was supposed to say kitchen remodel. Apparently I covered it up. This is the dining room. There was a wall between the tiny kitchen and the tiny dining room. So we were going to have to remove the heating pipes and replace the heat in the kitchen. So we saw that as an opportunity to replace the kitchen heat with the air source heat pumps, or ductless mini splits, as they were more conventionally called. And as we started looking into it, we thought, oh, this is going to be a bit of a production. Why don't we just do the whole house? So that's what we did. Our furnace was fine, but it was oil, and we hated putting the oil in and burning it. So we just decided to go for it. Mass Save helped us. We got a heat loan, as Ed mentioned, for 0%. And it cost us about $26,000. We did get an $800 rebate, and the heat loan was 7 years at 0%. So, and Mass Save did the contracting for having it installed. We put in 3 systems, 3 condensers. So this, or compressor, I'm never sure which you call it. But we put in 3 Fujitsu systems. So this is the one that's associated with the kitchen and living room, the first floor. So there's 2 heads associated with that. You can see here, that's our dining room head. And in our living room, we have one that's flush with the ceiling, which Ed had shown in his slides. I didn't put a picture of it in. So there's 2 on the first floor. A second system covers the 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a third compressor covers the basement, which all have the wall units. Now, one of the systems was problematic. These are ductless, which now at this point, I don't know why they didn't just hook into our air conditioning compressor system, which was ducted. But what they did was the refrigerant gets piped through this tube, and that's what does the heat exchanging. One of the systems was having constant problems with the motor. It was a lemon, basically. The motor was bad, and we also had a few issues with leaks in the pipes, which was very bad because the chemical that they use, the refrigerant, has a very high greenhouse gas potential. So we felt pretty badly about that, but we got it all. We replaced it from an older Fujitsu system. We put in a new Mitsubishi system. Oops, I don't have a slide for that. And it's a bit bigger. I was a little surprised how big this compressor was after they installed it. So I put up some plants in front on the deck so I didn't have to look at it. But it's been working well. There's one minor part that does break sometimes called a thermistor or mister. And we're going to learn how to replace those ourselves. But the other units throughout the house since 2014, we haven't had any problems with them at all. So I guess any mechanical system is going to have potential for problems, just like your furnace. As we were doing the kitchen, we also swapped out our old electric stove for an induction cooktop, which is very cool. The picture here shows, you can't really see the steam coming out, but that's a boiling pot of water, which takes about 2 minutes to heat up. And that's a towel that's between the burner and the pot. And the towel doesn't catch on fire, and it doesn't impede the delivery of energy from the cooktop into the water. The great thing about these, they're so efficient because they directly contact the thing they're heating up, and there's no leakage from around the edges. There's no heating up and cooling down, turning it on and off like with a resistance system. And it's the coolest thing since sliced bread, I gotta say. Love the induction cooktop. After a year of listening to the furnace coming on just to heat the water, because we had switched over to the heat pumps, we decided we've got to get rid of that. We've got to just shut off the oil furnace altogether. And we went out and we bought ourselves a heat pump hot water heater from GE. This was a, let me see, a GE GeoSpring, which I don't think they make anymore, but it has a few different modes. We can have it just in full heat pump mode, which is the most efficient. But it also has a resistance heater on it. So if it's particularly cold in the basement, or, you know, for whatever other reason, you can switch over to the, you know, typical resistance heat, which is less efficient. So now the oil furnace, we can just shut it off. We run it every couple of months just to make sure it still works, just in case, you know, we have a problem. It's good to have a backup. Before we did that, though, I'm just looking at my notes here. It's very important to have all your hot water pipes insulated, because you don't want to be heating up the cavity of your house as the water moves from the hot water heater to your sinks or wherever it's going. We also put this hot water heater somewhat closer to where the plumbing was ending up, more towards the middle of the house, so that the hot water doesn't have to travel as far to get to the bathtubs and the sinks. So, you know, every little bit helps. Speaking of appliances, I don't have a picture for this, but the best investment that any of you could possibly make, and the lowest tech, is a clothes drying rack. We hardly use our dryer at all. I just use it at the end of, after things have air dried, just to fluff them up, because clothes dryers use a lot of energy. So, so we hang up our clothes down in the laundry room in the winter, and take them outside in the deck in the summertime. Wind and solar energy at their purest. We also have a cordless electric lawnmower, because the lawnmower, the yard equipment that uses gas is really nasty. The emissions are extremely high, and a lot of not completely combusted fuel, so the pollution is really bad. So we have 2 batteries for the lawnmower that we swap out. You know, when one runs out, I just put that on the charger and put the other one on. But when it was new, it could mow our entire yard, which is, you know, pretty good size. Now it doesn't quite make it all the way, because they do go down after a while. So it wasn't until after we did all that in 2015 we decided we wanted to go solar. Now our house is kind of shady, and it's not perfectly situated for solar. We had 2 or 3 companies come in and tell us that our lot was not suitable, our roof was not suitable for solar. But we were persistent, and we called another company and said, we really want to do this. We don't care if it's not the most efficient thing you could possibly do. We just want to do this. You know, we know it would be pretty good. So this company called Revolusun, which recently changed its name to, I forget. Solaris, thank you. Has done 3 separate installations for us. So the first system we did was 29 panels back in 2015, and we put them on 3 faces of our roof. So this faces southwest, this faces northeast, and is that right? Yeah, and this and the other way faces southeast. So we don't have anything on the north side, but they all do pretty well. You don't need a perfect orientation to get good production.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that one of the things that we did not realize that there's a lot of light that comes into the panels that just comes from the open sky. It doesn't have to be direct sun. I think from clouds or from the open blue sky. There's a lot of light that goes in there.
Yep. So we had it put in, And it's not just solar panels, it's not simple. I don't want to mislead anybody to think that you're just going to call somebody up and tell them you want solar. You got to deal with the electric company, the building permits, the Department of Public Utilities. You need equipment inside your house. These are called inverters. We needed another switch box. This is a meter that shows what it's producing. And we did need to upgrade our service to 200 amps, but we would have had to do that anyway, because 100 just doesn't do it for really anybody these days. We all consume a lot of electricity. So the cost for the first system of 29 panels was $16,000 and change, and it included oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, no, I combined the first two. 3 years later, we added 10 more panels. You can see here where we added 8 on this side, and then we added 2 over here. And the total cost for all 39 panels was $16,624, and that included. Oh no, I am wrong about that. I apologize. First system was 51, the second system was 16, and we also got a electric car charger, which I'll talk about in a little bit, included. So let's see. So this is what our first 2 systems look like from the air. Our neighbors here were selling their house, so they hired a drone to take pictures above, and they sent us the picture. I thought that was pretty cool. So after we bought that, we had purchased a Tesla, my 60th birthday present, and it uses a considerable amount of juice. And then we wanted to replace the Toyota too, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now I'll talk about it now. Nissan Leaf we bought in 2021. And we needed more power to cover the cars as well as the heat pumps, because they all do use quite a bit of power. So we decided we wanted to put a carport out in our on the opposite side of our driveway, and we decided to put solar panels instead of a roof. So we have 18 more panels up here. They produce a lot more power because they're newer, and they also face the south, and they don't have any shade. So they are optimal. They are cranking. So we are now, I don't know yet, we haven't gone a full year with them in yet, but I'm estimating that we now have, with 57 panels, we can probably supply 80% plus of our electricity with our own solar. And we are getting net metering credit for the whole thing. It seems now it's only for the generation part, though, not that we still have to pay for the distribution, I think. I haven't quite figured that out.
What do you mean by that? It says smart no net metering. What does it mean?
The smart, I thought it included I thought it prohibited net metering, which is why we were intending to get.
Yes.
So they told us when we were putting this in, as time has gone on, the incentives are going down from the state to put in solar. We get SRECs, solar renewable energy credits. We get the full value for the older systems at about $250 a megawatt hour. Now you can't get that anymore. Now the electric company wants to get those credits, and they want to take credit for your panels. So they give you a little bump. It's supposed to be about $60 a kilowatt hour, megawatt hour, I'm sorry, through the SNART program, which is very complicated and requires you to sign a contract with Eversource. But we thought we were going to lose the net metering for that, but we didn't. So we were going to put in a Tesla Powerwall to save our electricity and use it at night when we weren't generating, rather than just lose the excess power that we generate in the summer. But we decided not to do that when we found out that we were getting some of the net metering credit.
And the power walls are expensive.
And the power walls are expensive, yes. Let's see now. Okay. So I have been keeping track of our generation and our usage, our electricity generation and usage for the past few years. And I graphed the last 3 years, 2.5 years. So you can see that the PV generation, of course, it's low in the winter time. And it goes up and peaks in, around the solstice, and then it comes back down again. Now that we have the new southern facing array, our winter generation seems to be considerably higher than it used to be. Of course, now this is our total electric usage. So this is with heat pumps and an EV. So our usage goes down in the summertime because the heat pumps are so efficient. We used to see a big spike when we had the old-fashioned central air conditioning system. Our electric bill would go up almost double in the summertime. And that's we don't keep it down that cold, but it's just not a very efficient system. When we put in the heat pumps, you barely noticed a blip when you use the air conditioning because the differential between the temperature outside and the temperature inside isn't that great compared with what it is in the winter time. So in the winter time, you can see our usage goes up quite a bit because of the heat and then comes down. So in the winter, we're using a lot more than we're generating, and in the summer, the other direction.
Was that year, just a question, was that year that we had one of the heat pumps out? And we put that in
Yeah, that was, I think that was back here.
Okay.
Yeah, so that wasn't reflected in this.
Sorry.
In this. So yeah, I can't account off the top of my head for the differences. I was driving a lot here because that's when Jan was in the hospital. So that's probably accounts for some of that increase. So that just gives you an idea of the ebb and flow of generation and usage. So this is a synopsis of our costs, and this is in thousands of dollars here. So how much we spent a total of $95,000, and that includes the two car chargers for our electric vehicles. We got a lot of tax credits. We've earned a lot of solar renewable energy credits. We've avoided $19,000 in electric costs over the since inception, since 2015. So our net cost to date is now $33,000. So we've paid down most of the cost. We've generated almost 80 megawatt hours, and but the best thing is we've avoided the emission of 37.4 tons of carbon dioxide since 2015. Now the electricity we did use, speaking of the community choice electricity, we have it in Westwood now, but before we got it, we joined New England Wind, which is out of the Green Energy Consumer Alliance. Has this program where they purchase wind energy, and you can pay for their costs, and that adds to, that's local energy, New England Wind, and the electric company can't buy those credits and claim it towards their requirements for renewables. So it effectively adds to the renewable portfolio for the state. So that's another good way. If you can't do solar or don't want to do solar, sign up for New England Wind if your town doesn't have community electricity aggregation. We just started it recently in Westwood. Took a long time. It's a pain in the neck. The DPU is very slow. And Now, if we want 100% green energy through our electricity program, our rate is 17 point something cents per kilowatt hour. So here's the cost. I didn't put the purchase cost of the Teslas and the Leaf, but you know, they're not that much more than a typical car, and the rebates really bring the price down to, you know, an ordinary car level. We don't drive all that much, so we put on 28,000 miles since 2019, late 2019. We've avoided 930 gallons of gasoline, and we've avoided over 9 tons of CO2 emissions. And the heat pumps have saved us, have helped us to avoid about 5,000 gallons of oil. That's a lot of oil, and 55.8 tons of CO2. So that's been the biggest improvement for a carbon footprint, is the heat pumps. All in all, we have avoided the emission of over 100 tons of CO2 since 2014. And I don't want to think about what we were emitting before that. Now that number doesn't include the insulation, the window replacements, we eat a plant-based diet, as Led mentioned. We avoid single-use products, which have a big footprint, which isn't reflected in Massachusetts because most of that emission happens in China. We vacation locally, and we do natural landscaping, and those are all topics for another day. So as I said at the beginning, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I do hope that those of you who haven't taken that first step will think about doing something and or continuing on your journey as we do. And Jan, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, well,
oh my God, it's 9 o'clock already.
Yeah, so this is Mark Jacobson's. Mark Jacobson is a professor at Stanford, engineering professor, and he has 2 books which are major. One is a very technical book about on the same subject, which is how do you convert the United States to completely clean energy, and this is the more popular version of that book that is less charged and things, but it's nice. Mark and I have had an awful lot of correspondence back and forth about stuff, so he's a good guy, and you know he talks the talk. You should see, he completely redid this house as well, so. He's got EVs and things. So.
Good. Yep. And we can all do it. So thank you for listening. I went over my time too, as I want to do. And do we have time for any questions? Are there any questions in the chat, Leslie? I mean, yeah. No, not no. Leslie wasn't doing. Amy.
Yes. Let me just look. I've been doing it. I thought I had seen some. Well, you know what I will do is I will just ask people, if you do have questions, to just raise your hand and unmute yourself, and we'll just take them informally. There was so much information between both of you. It's just absolutely amazing. The impact that can be made, and it's a good feeling to feel like we're doing our part and trying to make some of those changes. And we certainly have benefited by Ed coming over and having Mass Save come several times. So any other questions that people have? I think people may just be overwhelmed by the information.
Yeah, probably.
So, but I want to thank all 3 of you. Oh, Jonathan.
Yeah, Claire, how much did your Nissan Leaf cost? I mean,
I don't remember.
I think it was about around 30,000.
Was it around
30.
35, 35,000.
But then there was 10,000 in rebates.
Yeah.
too.
Oh, you got rebates.
Right.
10,000 for certain
Yeah,
cars.
that could be low. My estimate of that could be low. It could be a little bit more than that, but it was something like that. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but there's no maintenance. I mean, if you consider
Right.
the ownership costs, there's no oil changes, you don't have an exhaust system, you don't have spark plugs, you don't have, all those things that try to blow
But the
themselves up.
tires, right?
What's that?
Except for the tires, right?
Tires, suspension, and even the brakes, they have regenerative braking, so they
Really?
last a way lot longer than conventional brakes.
Wow. Because I'm thinking of getting an electric car eventually.
Good, there's a lot of them out there now.
Yeah, I saw one advertisement where it was selling Leafs that, pre-owned or leased cars for only $7,000 each.
Wow. Go for it.
Well, I missed my opportunity, but hopefully that'll come again someday.
Sure.
Hey, Amy, Charles Thomas posted a question up there.
Okay.
Charles, are you still there, Charles?
Uh-oh. Oh, yes, he is. He's there. I see him.
He's there?
Mhm.
Okay. So Charles, it looks like you're saying you consume 367 kilowatt hours for 1 month, and your local utility is offering to offset that amount of kilowatt hours by generating the same amount of energy via solar, biogas, and wind.
Oops. You just cut out, Ed.
I think he froze.
Yeah.
See,
The
it's
New
probably pretty, sorry?
You're cutting out. We didn't hear you for the past 10, 15 seconds.
Okay. You were about halfway through reading the question when you cut out.
Okay. Did it happen all throughout my talk?
Yeah.
A little bit, not as much as
Oh,
that.
God. Okay. So basically the answer is yes, it's worth doing that through your local utility, if that's the offer. Yes.
Okay.
Did
Well,
you hear that?
yes. Okay. Well, I thank all of you. This has just been amazing. And, what I love about your presentation is that it's so practical and useful, and it's something that people can put into practice. And it does make a huge difference. So I thank you both.
Yeah, and I just wanted to offer that if anybody has any questions, you can get my email address from us, or probably from Realm or from Claire, and if she gets a question, she'll just pass it on to me, and that can be about our setup, or it can be about climate things, and Ed knows a lot about climate too, so.
Terrific. Okay. And so thank you everybody for coming tonight. It was a great group, and we have one final Lane Lyceum next week. We have Tad Staley from First Parish is going to be having hopefully sounds like it will be a very casual conversation with the man who's married to his cousin. But this is a man who has taught at Harvard School of Government. He's written 20 books. I mean, he's just a world-renowned speaker. And so we're really fortunate to have him here for our final Lane Lyceum. So hope